Wait,
Record on this computer. It's recording.
good morning. I'm Jovita Pajarillo, and along with Mary Ann Mackey, we are members of the California Environthon Steering Committee. We welcome you back this Saturday morning for the continuation of the Salmon and Water webinar, which experienced Zoom snafus last Saturday and was rescheduled for today. This special webinar links water and wildlife with soils, forestry, watersheds, and political, social, and economic issues. I expect you all have reviewed the 3 videos that we sent you in advance because, and if you haven't, I recommend that you do, as you may find aquatics test questions based on their content, as well as this webinar. We have 3 seasoned experts today covering the history and life cycle of salmon, the canon of environmental laws, regulations, and policies as tools designed to protect and restore water quality and salmon, and a grassroots story of community and partnerships to rehabilitate a watershed for salmon survival. I will introduce each speaker in order of their presentation. So first of all, I would like to start with Bill Kier. Bill Kier's family expected him to study medicine and become a doctor. Bill, however, took a summer job with the California Department of Fish and Game as a scientific aide with the department's study of fishes in the San Francisco Bay and Delta estuary, and discovered, as Water Rat said to the mole in the children's book, Wind in the Willows, "Believe me, my young friend, there is nothing, absolutely nothing, half so much worth doing as simply messing about in boats." Bill graduated from Sacramento State University with a degree in biological science and went to work for the Department of Fish and Game, where he was able to mess about in boats and much, much more. Bill worked in the field as a fishery biologist and as a deputy fish and game warden on projects to improve stream conditions for fish. He became chief of the department's water projects branch, but then left Fish and Game to work for the California State Senate, the legislature. Bill became the state Senate's principal advisor on environmental policy and wrote many laws for the protection of water quality, wetlands, fish life, and more. For the past 36 years, Bill has led Kier Associates, a group of scientists who provide support to natural resources management agencies like the US Fish and Wildlife Service, the US Forest Service, and the US EPA, and many more. Kier Associates has provided salmon restoration services throughout California, in the Northwest huge Columbia River Basin, and even the Atlantic salmon watersheds of the Gulf of Maine.
Good job.
Next up will be Kat Kuhlman. Kat successfully led challenging water quality protection efforts at the EPA in San Francisco's regional office. She later joined the North Coast Regional Water Quality Control Board as its executive officer. She was responsible for, among other competing priorities, protecting and restoring key riverine ecosystems, supporting salmon health and survival. She was later appointed by Governor Brown to the California Natural Resources Agency as the Deputy Secretary for Ocean Policy. She has a deep knowledge of federal and state environmental statutes guiding regulations and implementation of programs essential to restoring and safeguarding watersheds. Her leadership and expertise have secured protections for California's coastal waters and designated marine protection areas through watershed plans, sound management plans, and issuing and enforcing pollution permits, all through the Federal Clean Water Act, the California Porter Cologne Act, and the Marine Life Protection Act. She currently serves as vice president for the nonprofit Coastal Quest and continues working to bring resources to local problem solving as climate change batters California's coast. Along with her husband, they are avid water devotees and enjoy exploring waterways and coasts along the world, or throughout the world, snorkeling and kayaking and messing about in boats. Oh, last and not least is Craig Bell. Craig has been a logger, a commercial salmon fisherman, a licensed fishing guide, and has been involved in watershed planning and restoring the Garcia River for over 30 years. He has served as president of the Salmon Restoration Federation, executive director of the Northern California Association of River Guides, member of the California Advisory Committee on Salmon and Steelhead Trout, and the Department of Fish and Game's statewide coho recovery team. He has worked as a consultant for the Conservation Fund, the Nature Conservancy, Trout Unlimited, and the Mendocino County Resource Conservation District. Craig was a mentor in the Americorps Watershed Stewards Project and received a grant from the Clinton administration to train and employ out-of-work loggers, commercial fishermen, and Native Americans in stream restoration. Craig is a winemaker and writer, and he has had many adventures in his lifetime. So with that, I welcome our speakers, and I ask Bill to take it away, please.
All righty, thank you, Jovita, and welcome to our discussion this morning of California salmon. And
Hold on one sec so I can share my screen.
I'm sorry.
Here we go.
Okay.
One more second. Okay.
Okay. Welcome to our conversation this morning about California salmon. And when we say California salmon, we actually mean Pacific salmon. There are 7 species of salmon that swim about in the Pacific Ocean, 5 of them on our side of the Pacific Ocean, and 2 others over on the Japan and the Siberia side. Our 5 salmon are the king salmon. Shown here is an example of my friend Roger Castillo holding a 36-pounder, I think it was when he found it, in the Guadalupe River underneath the Freeway 237, just on the north edge of San Jose. So those of you in the San Jose area, you have these guys coming in your river and watershed. Hang on, Marianne. Okay, that's good. Roger Castillo has done a good, hard job of trying to keep that river open and clean for those fish. The second most prevalent salmon that we have here on the California coast is the coho. And then there are 3 more species, the pink, chum, and kokanee. And we don't see many of those last 3, except that we had pink salmon show up in the stream just over the hill from where I'm speaking here in my office in San Rafael, California. We had pink salmon this year. So those are the California salmon, and let me tell you a little bit about their importance to humans. Okay, pardon me. We think that humans reached California about 18 to 20,000 years ago at the end of the last ice age, when people were able to walk from Siberia across a land bridge to Alaska. The ocean was about 150 feet lower in those days. And they would have known their salmon, and they would have connected with salmon on that migration all the way down through Alaska, Canada, Washington, Oregon, and into California. Anthropologists believe that a couple of 100 years ago, there were, a couple of 100 years ago, there were probably about 200,000 native Californians. Many of them living off of salmon. They estimate that those 200,000 native Californians were probably catching and eating upwards of 10 million pounds of salmon a year. So think on that. That's like 50 pounds of salmon per person for every man, woman, and child in California. Let's see, what do we eat 50 pounds of? That's like 200 hamburgers, okay? Just to give you a sense of how central those fish were to the nutrition of early Californians, native Californians. So native Californians depended on fish. On the salmon? What do the salmon depend on? Let's take a little bit of the life of a salmon. We've got this life cycle chart up here on the screen. The fish are called, scientists call them anadromous fish. That means going from saltwater into freshwater to spawn. So here they come from the ocean into their home streams. And by the way, Pacific salmon have an ability to find the very, very stream that they were born in by smelling differences in the chemistry of the streams. So imagine here comes a female Chinook salmon, say that was born in a tributary of the Sacramento River, and she comes through the Golden Gate all the way across this San Francisco Bay, finds the mouth of the Sacramento River, swims a couple of 100 miles up the Sacramento River, say to Deer Creek. She can actually find the stream that she was born in. She finds an area of stream bed that feels right to her, and she begins to build a nest. And see, there's a picture there at the top of that poster that shows female using her tail, her lower fins to move rocks out until she creates this pit, which we call a red, after the Scottish to make ready. And she, when it's the right size, she'll squeeze your body and deposit the eggs in there. A large female Chinook salmon can actually produce 10,000 eggs. The males come in at that point and do their thing. They fertilize the eggs with their sperm, and then she moves the rocks and pebbles back into the pit, covers the red with clean gravel in such a way that water can actually flow through the bed of the stream, through the red, bringing with it cool, clean water and oxygen for those eggs that are now starting to hatch or to develop. There has to be that flow of clean water through the bed of the stream, not only to bring in oxygen, but to take away any metabolic waste products from the egg mass. After a couple of months, the little guys start to hatch out, come up through the gravel into the stream itself. And they'll spend a month or two getting acclimated while their parents, poor things, are dying and rotting. Pacific salmon only get one shot at this reproduction. Pardon me, and they die afterward. So they have brought tons of nutrients into the river system. Native Americans have taken theirs. Bears, eagles, just about everything in the watershed comes down to enjoy the feast. Even as the fish rot, they are sustaining things like caddisfly larvae, pardon me. And interestingly, as the little salmon begin to develop in the stream, they start to eat the caddisfly. So everything is eating everything as a result of the nutrition that these fish bring into the streams. So they are a gift. And the native Californians who had, as I say, brought their knowledge of salmon with them to California, involved salmon in their art and in their songs and in their cultures. And it's very clear that salmon were life for native Californians. Pardon me. So what do salmon need? They need clean, clear water. They need, as the little guys prepare to move downstream, and something is in the same way that something tells the parents it's time to leave the ocean for the freshwater, something tells the little ones it's pardon me, it's time to move downstream. And as they start downstream, they're uniformly silver. I think some of these fish on the poster show that, but they then begin to develop vertical stripes on their side. We call them par marks, which serve to hide the fish among the vegetation along the edge of the stream. Fish are, the salmon are happiest when there's forest on the side of the stream, providing not only shade, but also providing bugs that fall on the water that the little guys eat. And as they move downstream, they find wetlands to hide in, to make it safely down to the estuary and to the bays and out into the ocean. As you think about it, the things that salmon need, which are cool, clean water, that is, if you build a dam, you're not only capturing the water, but you're capturing the sunshine and the solar energy and warming that water, perhaps to the point where when it's released downstream, it's too warm for salmon. So cool, clean water, clean stream beds, forest along the edge of the streams, wetlands. The things that salmon need, I've often thought are the things that we need. Clean water, forested stream banks that are keeping the soil where it's supposed to be on the hillsides. And over time, I've just developed this notion that if you take care of salmon, they'll take care of you. If you give salmon what they need, you'll be giving yourself what you need at the same time. So that's one thought I'd like to leave you with. And so, how well have we taken care of salmon? Well, not very darn well. It's interesting because so here's all these people that rushed into California in 1849 because of all the hype about gold, which was mostly a political stunt to get people to drop whatever they were doing around the world and rush in and basically seize land from the Republic of Mexico. That was what the gold rush was about, but boy, did it work. The official census of the state in 1850 was something like 90,000 people, and in 1900, the census was like 1.9 million people. So a 1,600-fold increase in population in 50 years. Think about that. Interestingly, though, these people that rushed in 1849 got together in 1850 at a convention and created the state of California and began to seriously discuss public policy and law. For example, in 1852, they enacted a law that prevented the building of barriers on salmon streams. How well has that worked? Well, we have about 1,500 barriers on streams in California today, many of them salmon streams. Every tributary stream in the San Joaquin River basin is dammed, as are most of the streams tributary to the Sacramento River. Klamath River has 4 dams. Eel River has 2 dams. In fact, there's about only one river left in California that has salmon and doesn't have dams, and that's the Smith River, which is clear up the California-Oregon line. So by and large, we haven't taken very good care of salmon, even though we've had laws in place to take care of them. But throughout the 170-year history of California, people have tried to protect salmon. And we're gradually becoming a society that honors the rule of law. And there's one law that intrigues me in particular because it's ancient. It came from ancient Rome 1,500 years ago, made it through England. And I think that Catherine's going to talk about it when I get through here in a minute. But it's this notion that you can grab stuff. I mean, people were hosing down hillsides into rivers in order to get at gold. People were damming and diverting streams to grow food and to plant orchards and so forth for these gold grubbers and others. Everybody was just trying to get their piece of the action in those first generations in California. And yet people were always trying to protect these salmon, whether successfully or not. So this concept that there's at some point, the grubbing has to stop, the dewatering of streams has to stop, because at the end of the day, those resources belong to all of us. That's the public trust that Catherine's going to tell you a bit about when I get through here, Marianne, could you pop the next slide and the next? Here's a couple of things, just brand new news. Here's a stream here in my county that gets a big chunk of money for salmon habitat improvement. And can you go back, Marianne, to the prior?
Next.
I'm sorry. There. This one really tickles me. Look at this. This was just the end of last month announcement that we're going to remove 4 of those dams on the Klamath River. This is stuff that I started working on over 35 years ago. So this one tickles me. So there is some good in us, and Catherine's going to explain how that works. Thanks.
Well, thank you for that, Bill. Again, my name is Catherine Kuhlman, and today I'm going to give you a very high-level review of the public trust doctrine and 6 key laws that are effective tools for helping salmon. So why do we have an obligation to protect salmon, and why do we need laws to do so? As Bill mentioned, salmon have lived off the Pacific coast and spawned in California streams for millennia. They were and continue to be an important food source for the first people who live here. The gold rush brought an influx of Europeans and genocide against the first people, and the mass extraction of salmon as a cheap food source. To give you some more population numbers, the population of California has risen from about 400,000 in 1860 to 16 million in 1960 to almost 40 million today. This rapid population growth has created increasing conflicts between the needs of salmon, their ecosystems, and the ever-expanding need for development. And as Bill mentioned, people want some of the same things as salmon. People want clean water to drink, water for our agricultural fields and cities. Salmon want cold water so they have water to swim in, and cold water so they have enough oxygen in the water to breathe. People need to use the natural resources from the salmon's habitat, trees for lumber, land for houses, and fields for agriculture. Salmon need flowing streams, deep holes to hide in, clean gravel beds to spawn, and they need shade from trees and willows along stream banks to keep the water cold and for them breathable. Okay, the concept of the public, we have a concept that it's our duty to protect the natural environment for ourselves and for future generations. And this is that public trust doctrine that Bill was talking about. And this doctrine, as he mentioned, has its origins in Roman law, and it can be straight, it's sort of a straight line you can trace from the Roman law, and it flowed to the Magna Carta in England and then was incorporated over time into English law, and then into US law, and then into California law. So public trust doctrine, and what is it? It says that the public has a right to clean water and the protection of streams, rivers, and seashore. The government, and in this case, it's the US government and the state of California, hold these rights in trust for the people and future generations. It's a very simple idea. It's very, very hard and complex to fairly administer because conflicts arise between the desire to protect our water and fish and the ever-growing population's need for food and shelter. Many of you may be well aware of Mono Lake, and it's a notable case where the public trust doctrine was used to protect it. The court reaffirmed that the state has a duty to protect Mono Lake, and it stopped LA from draining Mono Lake, despite LA's claims that it really desperately needed the water. There's also an expanding school, not yet, I'll tell you when, Marianne.
Okay, I moved back. Sorry.
Okay, thank you. And there's an expanding school of thought that the public trust doctrine can be used to force government action on climate change. And I think this is a really interesting concept and one that we all should be following in the next couple of years. Next slide. Okay. This powerful concept is embedded in all the laws we use to protect salmon, and I'll review 6 key laws of note. And this is not at all inclusive, but it's some of the really important laws that we use. Okay, each federal act has each federal act that I'll talk about has a state law that in many respects mirrors it and allows the state to administer the provisions of federal law with state-specific tweaks. So first I'll talk about the keystone pair of water quality laws. So that's the Clean Water Act and the California's Port of Cologne, and they work to provide clean water. And California's Port of Cologne also allows the state to control water quantity, and that is how much water can be taken from streams and still leave enough water that the fish can survive and do their deal. Then I'm going to turn and talk about the Endangered Species Act, both the Federal Endangered Species Act and California's Endangered Species Act. And these two acts provide CPR for failing species. Then I'll turn and cover the National Environmental Policy Act and the California Environmental Quality Act. These two statutes require that any major project undergo environmental review, including where appropriate, how it's going to affect salmon. Slide. Next slide. There we go. The Federal Clean Water Act is all about water quality, keeping water clean. And California's water quality law, Porter Cologne, covers, as I mentioned, both quality and quantity. And I'll come to quantity in a minute. In California, the State Water Resources Control Board, or more conveniently called the Water Board, and its 9 local regional boards administer the Clean Water Act and Porter Cologne. And it's interesting to note that the Porter Cologne was adopted in 1969, and many of its anti-pollution measures were incorporated into the Federal Clean Water Act when it was adopted a year later in 1970. Okay, let's drill down to Section 303 of the Clean Water Act, which requires the state to adopt water quality standards and plans to identify and clean up polluted waterways. When first passed, the Clean Water Act focused on getting sewage and industrial waste out of water. And by the late 1980s, that first phase of controlling these types of pollution had been largely completed, though, as you can imagine, it's a job that's never done. However, many of the nation's waterways were still polluted, as exemplified by the declining salmon populations in Northern California. There, salmon were suffering from the effects of diffuse pollution, alterations to their stream banks, and dewatering. Okay, just as a side note, what is diffuse pollution? So when roads are built and when trees are harvested, dirt is released and erodes into streams, filling deep holes and overwhelming the spawning gravel beds. Timber harvesting often removes the trees that provide cooling shade. The result is higher stream temperatures and shifts in stream morphology that are devastating to the salmon populations. In sum, the state's water quality standards were being violated, and the government was slow to identify the impact on these streams. It took a group of determined citizens to sue US EPA to make it act. And US EPA and the plaintiffs entered into a groundbreaking settlement agreement to develop cleanup plans as required by Section 303 of the Clean Water Act, creating plans called Total Maximum Daily Loads, or TMDLs. Next slide, please. Okay. So US EPA then, with the Water Board, teamed up to write the North Coast TMDLs, and using the state's planning authority to they developed detailed action plans for the watershed. Key geographic areas where pollutants were causing the water quality standards to be violated were identified, and watershed action plans were put in place. Based on these plans, local sponsors applied for cleanup grants to restore stream morphology and plant trees and willows to shade the water. Importantly, these plans pair with pollution permits that the state can issue under Porter Cologne to prevent activities from creating future pollution. California is one of the few states that can write permits to control pollution from diffuse sources, an action that is not contemplated in the Federal Clean Water Act. And controlling these diffuse sources of pollution in a stream, it takes a long time for a stream to heal. And it takes both determination, money, and time. And Craig's going to cover that on how these laws have been used to clean up the Garcia River. Next slide, please. Okay, I mentioned that the California's Porter Cologne also gives the Water Board the authority to control the amount of water that is taken from rivers. Remember, the public trust doctrine requires the state to protect water resources for present and future generations. And so the Water Board issues water right permits to allow people to take water from a river, use it to water fields, or provide drinking water for cities. And while called water rights, they really are permits that can be revoked or modified by the state. For example, during a drought, the amount of water that may be taken from a stream can be reduced. As you can imagine, this is a very difficult balancing act, as much of California's water was over allocated in the 1960s and 70s. And now, combined with climate change, many of California's rivers do not have enough water to provide good fish habitat and meet people's needs. These dewatered streams, along with physical blockage of spawning habitat, has led to the crashing of salmon populations, and the listing of the listing of the Sacramento winter Chinook run as endangered and coastal and Central Valley runs as threatened under the Federal Endangered Species Act. Next slide. Okay, under the Endangered Species Act, and for salmon which live in both the ocean and streams, the National Marine Fisheries Service designates the geographic scope of the endangerment, naming specific geographic stretches that are critical habitat for endangered species. They work in partnership with the California Department of Fish and Wildlife to develop recovery plans, which other federal and state agencies implement through grants and careful designs for new projects within the geographic boundaries. ESA is a very, very strong tool for bringing species back from the brink, and we hope they're going to be successful with salmon as well. Next slide. So last set of laws I want to talk about are going to be the National Environmental Policy Act and the California Environmental Quality Act, both of which require full environmental review of the impact of any major proposed project. These analyses that are found in both environmental impact reports and environmental impact statements must fully disclose the effect of the project on the environment and be transparent to both the public and decision makers. If the project will harm the environment, it needs to be modified or mitigation proposed to ameliorate the damage. For example, the federal and state water projects that deliver water from Northern California and the Sierra to the Central Valley farmers and Southern California, they update their water delivery plans from time to time. And when they do, they must complete a NEPA review. Among many factors, the new plans are reviewed for their impact on salmon. They must also update and provide protection for any species listed under the Endangered Species Act that we've just discussed. Okay, that's a lot. I guess as a final note, I'd like to make the note that all of these statutes are piecemeal in their very approach. That is, once there's a problem, they set things into motion. And none of them really focus on a holistic approach of protecting watersheds and making sure that the problems don't arise in the first place. But to conclude, these laws reflect society's desire to protect our resources consistent with the thread we draw from the public trust doctrine. But water is life, and there isn't enough of it in California. Sadly, I wish it would rain. When the balance goes too far from protecting our resources for the future, it's up to all of us to ensure the laws are enforced. And there are places where, through the efforts of tireless advocates, salmon are holding their own and even showing recovery. And the Garcia River on the North Coast is one of those places. And my colleague, Mr. Craig Bell, who has been instrumental in working on the Garcia over the years, is going to talk to you about that. It's yours, Craig.
Thank you, Kat. And first, I'd like to give kudos to Bill Kier, Catherine, Hovita, and Marianne, because you guys have the very difficult jobs of being administrators, agency employees, and people that sit at desks and meetings as your habitat. I have had the amazing good fortune to spend most of my time floating on these rivers, actually touching these powerful animals, salmon and steelhead, and the luxury of getting in touch with the tides. And how powerful are these animals? As a reminder of what Bill said, when mastodons and camels were roaming North America, salmon were traveling in North America's rivers. The Ice Age came, they retreated to the Columbia River, and when the Ice Age left, they repopulated the state of California's rivers almost to Mexico. North Coast rivers, as Kat pointed out, are very polluted. This was an eye-opener for me. my evolution in understanding all this is tied directly to the evolution of the Garcia River. The idea that people view these North Coast rivers as these beautiful redwood lined streams that have no dams, that are just amazing things of beauty. And it takes some scientific understanding to understand that they're extremely polluted with sediment, and many of them also with temperature, which was established as a pollutant under the Clean Water Act, as Kat mentioned. The Garcia River is my home river, and it's a river where so many firsts happened, so many firsts. It was the first river in the state to have a community stakeholder developed watershed plan that was approved by the Board of Supervisors in 1990. It was the test case for the Clean Water Act that adopted sediment as a pollutant. It went all the way to the Supreme Court, where the Supreme Court refused to hear it in the case of Pronsolino versus Marcus. It was the first Clean Water Act river to have a Clean Water Act sediment implementation plan. And it had mandatory timelines. It was not voluntary. They had 20 commercial timber landowners had 20 years to meet their actions to control to address controllable sediment inputs. Commercial timberlands had 10 years. Private small landowners had 20 years to address their controllable sediment sources. That work is now done largely. Probably 70% of controllable sediment sources have been addressed in the Garcia. And it's an example of the regulatory approach working. Many people say the regulatory approach cannot work. It worked in the Garcia, but it also, one of the reasons it worked is that local, state, and federal governments gave a lot of assistance to the landowners, both through voluntary help, volunteers helping people on their land, a lot of grants, in literally millions of dollars in grants to address these problems, and no one was put out of business. The response in the Garcia River was dramatic. I have seen, and it's documentable, that in 20 years there's been a serious physical recovery in terms of water quality and spawning gravels, and a biological recovery in terms of increased steelhead cove and the return of Chinook salmon, which had been missing for 50 years. 50 years. My geomorphologist buddies, I asked them, once we addressed all these sediments, how long would it take to see this kind of recovery? They all said at least 50 years. I saw it happen in 20 years, what I'm telling you about. So, and because of this, Clean Water Act protection and implementation in the Garcia, comprehensively done, money began to flow into the Garcia from nonprofits. Notably, the Conservation Fund purchased 25% of the Garcia River, and along with the Nature Conservancy, set up conservation easements, and that their timber practices are far and above the forest practice rules. They're so far above that they are getting credit for the extra trees they leave as carbon credits, and they're able to sell those and put that money back into restoration in the Garcia. It's that concept of the snake eating its own tail. And it's the forestry practices there are really, it's the first example in the state of California of a conservation organization taking over and managing commercial property for timber production, not as a park. The land stays on the tax rolls, it provides taxes to the county, and at the same time, it's managed above and beyond the forest practice rules, with the goal of achieving a forest of late seral, eventually old growth trees. They also control 4 of the major tributaries, and the Nature Conservancy has easements on much of the main stem and 2 complete tributaries, complete protection. The estuary of the Garcia was purchased by the public. It's called Stornetta Lands. You can go there and hike all over the estuary. You own it. Recently, I was down there and I looked over, and here was a bald eagle standing on a large log, acting like he owned the place. And I can tell you, 40 years ago, there were not bald eagles in the Garcia, and that bald eagle does own the place. And how I refer to the Garcia, because it's been comprehensively protected from the headwaters to the ocean, refer to it as the watershed with a warranty. And in that way, it's attracted the very best in restoration mines. I worked with a group called the Salmon Restoration Federation, and we brought in the best restoration mines, Pacific Watershed Associates, Bioengineering Associates, to deal with upslope assessments and bank failures in the lower river. Next slide. Okay, here's an example of a bank failure in the lower river. Landowners were allowing their cows to graze right up to the river's edge, eat all the riparian vegetation. The river rose and would just eat into their land. And there was a landowner who rose up one day. He was the patriarch. He said, "I'm here to tell you that I've been on this river for 60 years. Our cows eat the vegetation. The river eats into our land. We got to get the cows out of the river." He broke the ice. All of a sudden, I was able to work with him, with volunteers and grants, to repair his land. And all the other landowners realized it was a good thing. They agreed to fence their cattle out. We have no more cattle anywhere in the Garcia River. So here's a picture of what it looked like before a bioengineering fix. Next slide. Okay, this is after, and this is we have state-of-the-art monitoring in the Garcia and tools that we use. Some of them small computer-readable devices we put in the stream to measure temperatures that you can put in the spring, remove in the fall, and download into graphs to record the temperatures. What we used here is called a bioengineering repair, as I was taught by Evan Engber, who was the contractor. This is a 3,000-year-old technique that the Chinese used to repair the Yangtze River, to bring it under control when they were an agrarian society. It involves minimal amount of rock and maximum amount of living material. What you cannot see beneath all this is a tow trench that was dug by an excavator and was filled with willows, 12, 15 feet tall, backfilled. Those were staked down. This is 5 years after that project of what you saw in the beginning. Next slide, please. And there's a lot of talk about drought and salmon, and the Garcia. It's actually kind of storm-proof because we have addressed comprehensively the sediment inputs to the entire watershed. Not only is it storm-proofed to resist harmful sediment inputs in heavy storms, it's also drought-proof because the lower river has recovered so much by being able to clean itself out, because it doesn't have continuous layers of sediment inputs, that the lower 8 miles of the river now has clean, really large cobble that are Chinook quality spawning cobble. And so in a drought, when all the other coastal rivers here are going to have a very, very poor steelhead run, the lower 8 miles of the Garcia is going to have a very successful steelhead run, because the fish were able to spawn in that lower main stem. Their progeny will rear, go out to the ocean and return in such a way that we have a storm-proof watershed and a drought-proof watershed. If you could back it up, please. So this is an example. This is a photo of the river that was taken from my drift boat, the North Fork Garcia, 1995. You can see literally that's a 7 to 8 foot bank of solid sediment. That wall of sediment puked out of the North Fork Garcia. It came clear out across the main stem. The main stem cut through it, and what you're seeing is the cut through portion and the portion that's still remaining at the North Fork. That is pollution. That is illegal, a violation of the Clean Water Act. And by going up and addressing all of the controllable sediments in the North Fork, I'll show you what the North Fork looks like just this week. Next slide. Here is what the mouth of the North Fork looks like now. Clean cobble. That entire bank is gone. If I backed up from that, all I could show you is there's a wall of willows there. There's not a wall of soil. That is all gone. And Chinook salmon literally spawned right in front of this tributary. I saw these reds about 4 days ago. But while I was looking at that recovery, which was mind-blowing to me, and seeing the Chinook reds there, a peregrine falcon just glided right past me about 50 yards up, and it was like she owned the place, and she does own the place. There were not peregrine falcons there 40 years ago. And this is the Native Americans talk about having experiences that are spirits or messages. I don't know if I believe the spirits, but when I see signs like this, I know that this river, the work is done, my work is done. So people here are, folks listening here might want to wonder how you can get involved, especially students. And I can say that one of the greatest programs I got involved was the Americorps Watershed Stewards Project. I was a mentor, and students can sign up, college students, they can get a living stipend, as you can see. They can get money for college, and they can even have college funds, loan funds for forgiveness. So if anybody's considering a career, environmental career, I strongly suggest they enroll in this. It's almost like a native, it's like a Peace Corps in the United States. And this will look very good on your resume, and you will meet people, some of the highest class peoples that will be your friends for the rest of your life. Okay, next slide. Okay, that's a link to Americorps. Bottom line is just Google Americorps Watershed Stewards. And another group you can get involved in, I know some people listening to this are from Southern California. Trout has a program, the Southern California Steelhead Program, and they're a nonprofit, and they are always looking for help. If you want to get involved hands-on, contact Trout, contact the local people working on the Southern California Steel Project. You can go there, do field tours, plant trees, do monitoring, and it will be a great way for you to get involved in hands-on in restoration practices. So one of the things that if you're involved in this, you're going to be involved in testifying in lots of hearings. I didn't think I wasn't a good public speaker. I didn't know how restoration should happen. My first view was we just need to dump a lot of fish in these rivers, hatchery fish, and I later came to understand that's like painting over rotten wood. We needed to address the whole watershed, and we needed to have the laws enforced. And part of that is you need to testify at hearings. Regional Water Quality Control Board, State Fish and Game Commission, Board of Forestry. And I remember testifying at these hearings, and all we were asking for is that the laws of the land be enforced. And I remember one hearing for the Board of Forestry. I stepped up and in kind of my good old shucks way, I said, I'm from Ohio, and I was taught that asking for the laws of the land to be enforced was very conservative. And I am hearing people here referring to those of us asking for those laws to be enforced are radicals. And I said, in Ohio, being radical was violating those laws. And I remember after I left the microphone, one of the logger fellows said to me as I walked by, "Go back to Ohio." So we need support in this. The Garcia River is an amazing example of what can happen when you address a whole watershed. All of these things, the rules hit the river, all of the things that, all the rules, all of the best restoration techniques were applied, and we got it done, and we have the proof on the ground, both physical and biological. But we need people to work all over the state. We need people to go to these hearings, to adopt their own watershed, to contact the Department of Fish and Wildlife, to find out where you can help, and to be champions. We need warriors fighting for the commons, to protect the commons, and fighting for salmon. And we can make a difference. You can make a difference if you do that, and we have made a difference with the Garcia River as an example. So thank you very much for anybody that dedicates their life for fighting for salmon.
Wow. Thank you all. I mean, this has been an extremely interesting, captivating, and educational webinar. Given the 3 topics that you gave us, I think that it could very well lead, Craig, to inspire future salmon advocates, or at the very least, to get our youth involved in these issues and to create the awareness, especially with the looming crisis of climate change, as Kat pointed out. And Bill, what a fantastic job on the history and the life cycle of our salmon. So thank you for sharing your real experience and your knowledge and your wisdom to our students and with California Envirothon. As you know, this is a recorded webinar, and I see that Steve Engelman, one of our Envirothon teachers, has joined. And Steve, I don't know you have any of your students, because I would like to take the time for questions to our esteemed panelists.
I don't have any students with me, but, or do you ask me to speak for my students?
Say what you will.
Unfortunately, Hubita, I didn't see that you sent me the link on a different email. And so I missed the first,
Oh,
I don't know, maybe 20 minutes or so. But I actually really enjoyed listening to everything there. And I'm hoping, so this is going to be recorded and submitted
yes.
sometime soon, because I think my kids would really enjoy the stories that I was able to hear. And I also really enjoyed like the last part, like coming back to where, you know, through Americorps or the Cal Trout, you know, like programs like that. I every year I have students who kind of like, they get a little excited, but they don't know where to go. And if I can point them in a direction you know, that does a lot, even if it's just like 2 or 3 kids. I think it helps out a lot. So I don't have any specific questions, but I definitely enjoyed it. And thanks a lot for doing that.
I want to let everyone know as well that this webinar is recorded, and once we have it downloaded from the cloud, we will put it on our website as part of our YouTube channel. So that will take a few days, so your students and others can preview it. And I also want to say to Kat and Bill and Craig that with your permission, since we didn't have the students, on other webinars, other panelists have agreed that if students, once they viewed the webinar, if they have questions, may they directly email you with their questions so that you can get back to them, because we really want it to be in some way interactive for them.
Works
So
for
would that
me.
be okay?
Yep.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Mary Ann, do you have any closing remarks?
Does Rick
Or
have-
anyone else for that matter?
No, just thank you.
I'll just make one closing remark. I mentioned about money flowing into the Garcia because it was considered a watershed with a warranty that was so protected. No investment could be ruined by land practices. Over $54 million has been spent in the Garcia that were attracted because of the Clean Water Act protection that it has.
But that included land purchase, right?
That included acquisitions, yes.
Yeah.
But those acquisitions, in my opinion, wouldn't have been made unless someone felt their investment was going to be protected from pollution upstream.
Okay. All right. So I want to thank you all again. This has just been fabulous. It's been fun spending time with you all, actually. It's nice bringing the old warriors together. So I may call upon you next year. We could do part 2 of this, because I know there's so many layers of information. So you may be hearing from me again. So thank you again. And sorry about the hassle, Steve, but your students will get to see the webinar.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Stop recording.